Welcome everyone to Rambling About Cars. We are back. Sorry for the delay. If any of you saw our socials, we just had a recording snafu last night, and things happen. So we're recording now, and so this episode will be back up on Friday rather than Thursday like usual. But
it was a soggy recording attempt.
Yes, that
I'll
makes
just leave
it
it at
sound
that.
way grosser than what actually happened.
Yeah, I suppose so. But hey, Christopher Smith here, Chris Bruce across the way. We're happy to be chatting you up. And yes, you need to go follow us on the socials so you know when dumb crap like this happens. Where do they follow us on social, Bruce?
So we are at Rambling About Cars on YouTube. We're at Rambling About Cars on Facebook. We're at Rambling About Cars on Instagram. We're at Rambling About Cars on Threads. We're at RAC Pod on X, aka Twitter, because Twitter can never be nice to people. And we're at Rambling About Cars podcast at gmail.com if you want to email us.
Yes, make sure you make a note of those because we are going to do a little bit of a format shift. We're not going to be going we're not going to be going weekly. We're going to tone it down and go once a month here for a little bit just to give Bruce and I a little more time to come up with some really good compelling topics. And just to give us a little bit more time to help spread the word, get some promo out there, bring a bigger audience into the podcast. We've got a few new ones in the can already that we're really excited about here that people can come to YouTube and watch. This is going to just give us a little bit of a chance to spread our wings a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, and to be a bit more explicit about what Smith's saying there. So obviously we brought back Rambling About Cars 4 weeks ago. This is our 4th episode. We've made the decision that we're going to make this a monthly show. It comes down to both kind of how the audience is going with the current show and then also the amount of time that Smith and I have to put into things. Mm-hmm. To go along with that, though, we would like to do the show even better so that I would like to say, and I can't make this promise yet because we'll have to see, but maybe bringing back the live show, but doing it once a month, or, just kind of being able to delve way deeper into topics than we have been for the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Things like that. So yeah, you're going to get Rambling About Cars once every 4 weeks now, rather than once a week. Please stick with us.
And hey, absence makes the heart. No, I'm not going to say it. That's such a cliche. I'm not going to say it. You know what I was going to say, but yeah, we've have some plans. We want a little more time to try to develop some of these plans.
Right.
But in the meantime,
we'll be able to promote things more on social media. Is one of the things that'll mean is that, it's not that you'll only get a social media post once a month from us saying that the next show is going up. I would expect at least weekly posts from us on our various social media platforms, just kind of, giving hints as to what we're thinking about. If you saw what I did today in regards to the topic tonight, I posted a photo on Instagram and Threads.
Yeah, and I hate you for posting that photo, by the way.
Well, you're gonna hate me more once we start discussing the car. So
no, it's fair. It's fair. It's such a good looking car that has such a well. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I guess we can let you know right now. We're talking about muscle from the 70s, and we're not talking about early 70s. We're talking about the Malaise Era.
Right. Specifically is the Malaise Era, as you and I figured that out. This is coming a little bit more quicker than I expected. So let me pull up a thread here, and I'll be able to pull it up.
Just giving folks a preview, and until we you don't have to pull up everything right now.
Well, no, but I think people should know what the Malaise Era is. It was
that's fair.
Coined by journalist Merle Martin. I tried to find a specific date. I wasn't able to. I'm 95% sure it was in 2007, which coincides pretty well with about the first time I started hearing the term. And he, since he is a person that is alive and still writing, and you can still find his writing today. He has a very specific definition of it. He says it is vehicles between 1973 and 1983. And the reason he picks those 2 years is that 1973 is the beginning of the OPEC oil embargo, which caused gas prices to just shoot up in the United States and around the world also, but specifically the United States, which meant cars with big thirsty engines were now way more expensive to keep on the road. I mean, during that time, there were points where you could only fill up your gas tank depending if you had an even or odd license plate. So it was
a time.
It was dire times. Also in 1973, the federal government mandated the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, which if you look at a lot of cars from that period, especially the later 70s and also the early 80s, they have just hideous bumpers on them.
Like afterthought. Hey, we have to put something on here. So bloop. Right.
The poster child for that, and I don't have a photo, is the Lamborghini Countach, which the ones of those that were delivered in the US, they still had to have this mandated 5-mile-per-hour bumper, and it is just hideous.
Right.
It's absolutely hideous.
That's what you have to look forward to. That's going to be our main topic here for tonight. But as always, we're going to talk about a little bit of news, and we do just have a little bit of news. And also stick around for a cheap car challenge.
Oh, yeah. We got
it's time. Nice. It's time. If you know our topic, which we just talked about, you can probably guess what the cheap car challenge is going to be. So stick around for that. But right now, let's talk about something that's not going to be cheap, not going to be remotely cheap. We know a Corvette ZR1 is coming. That's not been any secret for a long time.
Well, if you're watching this video here, you can see that it's coming.
Chevrolet has been teasing it, debuting this summer. It's gonna have the Z06 engine with a couple turbos. Now, Chevrolet isn't saying that yet. They're not saying that yet, but their teaser that they dropped shows a Corvette-looking kind of car, and it sounds like the Z06 engine, which is the high-revving 5.5-liter double overhead cam V8.
Mm-hmm.
And you get this kind of weird whooshing sound as it goes by. I'm saying this kind of hesitantly because it's a teaser, but I mean, I've been covering the C8 since before it came out.
We both have.
We both have, Bruce. Covering it obsessively, some might say. And I still remember a report from, it must have been like 2020 or 2021.
I think it was 21, if it's the one I'm thinking of that you're about.
Yeah, I mean, not long after the C8 debuted, it was supposed to be a leaked report of a general Corvette timeline, a C8 timeline, that talked about the different models, and it talked about this car. It talked about I can't remember if they called it the E-Ray or Grand Sport at that point, but they called out the hybrid Corvette. They called out the Z06. They called out the ZR1, and then it all ended with Zora, which I mean, we'll talk about here in a bit. And thus far, that report has been pretty much spot on. So that was back in 2021 when all that was happening. And that report spelled out, okay, the hybrid Corvette that's going to have just the 6.2-liter V8 with the electric powertrain. It called out the Z06 that was going to have a double overhead cam, naturally aspirated V8 that they were calling 5.5-liter. That panned out just fine. Now we're up to ZR1. What did that report say? No way. It said the Z06 5.5-liter twin turbo. And they were calling that around 800 and some horsepower. So we had this teaser. Coincidentally, sounds like the Z06 engine. Sounds like it has a couple turbos. Debuting this summer, 800 horsepower. I would suspect at least 800 horsepower coming from this. What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, sorry, I'm holding a dog underneath me who's deciding to bark at other dogs that are walking by, so that's why I have an awkward look on my face.
Hi, Cooper.
Yeah. Everything that you said, I think, is absolutely right. That report that we got in 2021 has been everything else about it has been accurate. So why would you not expect it to be accurate now, especially when you watch this teaser? And it, like Smith said, it's only 22 seconds long, but the meat of it is at like right at about 10 seconds, where you hear the engine revving up and you hear the driver shift, and there's this whooshing sound that definitely sounds like what turbos sound like.
And the engine note to me does not sound like the 6.2 liter in the Stingray. It does not sound like the Cam Block 6.2 liter from the Stingray. It sounds it doesn't necessarily have the full scream of the Z06 though. So maybe it's just running at lower RPMs. Maybe also, instead of a flat plane crank, it could have a cross plane. That's something that we still don't know. But it's the 5.5 liter. It's not 100% confirmed, but it's the 5.5 liter. Right. It's some form of that Z06 engine with 2 turbos. And it's probably going to have 800 or more horsepower. And it's coming this summer.
Think that all of that's accurate. I think the only thing I would add is that you were saying that it didn't sound like it revved as high. That's something you would kind of expect from a turbocharged engine, just because they generally reduce the compression a little bit. So you have a little bit fewer revs, but you gain that because you have the boost, going in. So you don't usually see turbocharged engine. Generally, turbocharged engines would have a lower red line than a naturally aspirated engine. So it's not too surprising to hear that and see that.
Right. But I think the takeaway is, like we said, the report that we had years ago so far is lined up. This teaser is lining up with that report. So 800 plus horsepower. And we're talking about it, everything's lined up with that report. That report said ZR1 is not the flagship. There's be one more after this. The Corvette Zora, of course, named for the gentleman who was basically the father of the Corvette, envisioned a mid-engine Corvette long, long ago. The Zora will basically, according to this report, be a ZR1 with E-Ray hybrid assist. And that would put it somewhere 1,000, maybe a little over 1,000 horsepower, all-wheel drive, twin turbo. Sounds interesting. Sounds, well, I don't know. I could probably have a little bit of fun with that car. By the way, I'm totally being intentionally underrated here. That sounds insane. That sounds crazy. There won't be any other Corvette like it. All-wheel drive, twin turbo hybrid. Not confirmed yet, not even teased yet, but if we follow that report, which so far has been accurate, that'll be what's coming next.
Right. I'm thinking about it here a second, and I feel like I would, I'm not a person that's going to go to track days or anything like that. I feel like a Z06 would be plenty for me, or an E-Ray maybe would be plenty for me, honestly, for just road use. But I'm glad Chevy's making it. I just don't know that,
Well, E-Ray is billed more as the
it's the grand sports,
the kind of grand touring. Hey, it has all-wheel drive. This could be your all-season Corvette. I don't know anybody that's going to throw snow tires on it and drive. I mean, I would. That would be a lot of fun. But that's kind of billed as your daily driver Corvette. The Z06, I think, might be a little too high strung for just daily use. Neat car, I think would be a little high strung. ZR1 twin turbo. The Z06 already is a contender for it, against Italian supercars. ZR1 is going to be moving towards the hypercar realm, if you will. The Zora will absolutely be hypercar realm. So definitely new territory for Corvette. Raise of hands, everybody out there. Does anybody miss the front engine Corvette? I kind of do. I feel like the C8, it's a cool car. It's a great car. But as we progress further through it, I just find myself kind of missing the old formula: front engine, rear drive, just simple fiberglass body. Everybody wants to move their performance cars higher and higher and higher up the ladder. I mean, once upon a time, the Corvette was sort of the cool American street fighter that still had really good performance to go up with world-class sports cars, but it wasn't really competing with or priced in that supercar realm. This kind of is. I mean, a Z06, I mean, people are paying what, 170 grand for a Z06?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere around there. So,
yeah, again, not vehicles that I've actually driven, so I can't comment about them in that way. But just seeing C8s on the road now for a while, and obviously seeing C7s still on the road, and well before that, the C7 catches my eye more for some reason. I don't know why. Just
now, see, I was never a big C7 fan. We've had this discussion.
We
before.
have, yeah.
I would have a C6 over a C7. I would have a C3 over all of them. Why? Because I'm stupid.
Well, buddy,
I'm stupid.
Thank you for that.
I'm stupid,
transition.
but that's what I want. Hey, I love the looks of the C3. Give me a C3, then a C6.
Okay, well, that's a perfect transition into our topic this week, which is
C3.
Malaise.
C3 is not just a Malaise car, but go ahead.
Well, it's not at the very beginning. It's a very good performance sports car. By the end, it's not something that's so
it's
great.
Still the same car, just with a little less power.
A little, yes, a little less power
and more louvers. But go ahead.
Yes. So the topic this week is, we called it Malaise Era muscle, but as I was preparing the topic, I kind of broadened it out into Malaise Era performance cars in general. And to start, we need to define our terms. And I know at the beginning we kind of mentioned this, but journalist Marilee Martin, he coined the term Malaise Era when it comes to automobiles. And I will read you specifically what he wrote a little bit after that, but in order to find things. The Malaise Era of automobiles began in 1973 and ended in 1983. Full stop. Some will try to convince you that it extended until 1995, the last year of OBD2 engine control standard the year that the engine control standard became mandatory in U.S. market new cars and light trucks. But they are wrong. The year 1973 marked the beginning of the OPEC oil embargo, which tripled the price of oil virtually overnight. It was also the first model year that the federal government required new cars to have 5-mile-per-hour crash bumpers. On top of that, 73 was the year in which the EPA decreed that lead would be phased out of gasoline. Oh, and it was also the first year in which emission control regulations really started to take bite. The year 1984, on the other hand, was when the Ford Mustang got an honest 205 net horsepower, up from a depressing 115 horsepower in 1981. At the same time, U.S. car buyers could choose from a broad selection of new convertibles. Many tears were shed over the last of the convertibles in 1976. This is my little sidebar. That was another government thing. They thought they weren't safe enough, which is why you ended up with things like Targa roofs and T-tops and stuff like that, because it still could roll over safely without having a full-on roof there. But my digression. It was also the year in which the new Corvette would be the first to handle like a true sports car. The Malaise Era was over in 1984. So I am quoting journalist Marilee Martin. I
don't know how I feel about that last bit about the C4 being the first Corvette that could truly handle like a sports car. But the point being, 1983, that seems to be the boundary where this era finally ends and the next era begins. And I would agree with that, because you really start to see things turn around right about 1984. Things kind of step, I guess you could say, in the better direction. 73 to 83, definitely some dark years, but there are also some lights during those dark years.
There are. So the way I prepared this, I have the good section and I have the bad section. And Smith, which would you prefer to start with? Do we want to start with good or bad? Bad is going to make you mad.
Bad is not going to make me mad.
Okay.
I will have some counterpoints.
Deal.
And some context to add. But no, let's start with the good. And I'm super happy that you picked the car that you picked to start with, because it's one that I think a lot of people forget. And it was like a big middle finger to everything that was coming. It came from General Motors, specifically Pontiac. We're talking about the Pontiac Trans Am SD-455.
Yep.
It had that little shaker hood up on the top. It still had a decent amount of power. I think 245 or 250 horsepower from its 455 cubic inch V8. No, it wasn't
actually 310.
Oh, even better.
You could get the regular 455 had 250, and the 455 Super Duty had 310.
No, I mean this isn't a 400 horsepower, 450 horsepower stuff from the late 60s, early 70s. But for 73, when things are starting to crunch down, that's still a legit muscle car with a lot of oomph, and it looked good too, man. That early era Trans Am, just with a, don't think that had the bumpers on it yet, did it, Bruce? If I remember correctly.
So you're messing me up just slightly, only because I've got an article pulled up in one tab, and I'm pulling up the car in the other tab. So hang out with me just a second.
You have tab fatigue.
Oh, I've got serious tab fatigue. Don't you worry.
Okay. There are bumpers on there, but it's a different front fascia. Well, that's a 74. The 73 was a little different yet.
It was. You gotta bear with me here.
I mean, just to give you an idea, I mean, the 73, 74, that was before Pontiac went with the rectangular headlights that we saw in 77. Right. So it had the round headlights similar to the Camaro. It had much more of a Camaro look back then, but 73 was the first year you got that big old Firebird on the hood.
77 was the first year, I believe. Hold on.
No, 70. I thought 73. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. Sorry, buddy. I just got...
I'm right sometimes.
Tab fatigue as I'm trying to pull up images. Man.
You're working way too hard. Let's just talk about the car.
I'm embarrassing myself real quick now. Yeah, right now. Okay, let's talk about the car. Let's you and I talk about the car. So the SD-455, it was a 2-year model year. It was 2 model years only, 73 and 74. And like I said, with the Super Duty package, you could get a less powerful 455 with a 4-barrel that made 250. The Super Duty made 310. I found a review from Car and Driver, and there's one point where I really want to read, just because it's really good. So you mind for just a second if I read this to you?
No, go ahead. I think I know what you're talking about, but go ahead.
Okay. So just how fast is the 1973 last of the fast cars, which is what they're calling this Pontiac in their thing?
The last of the fast.
Let your concentration wander over the truly fast cars of today. Again, this is 1973. 454 Corvettes, 911 Porsches, Panteras, Jaguar V12s, but only briefly, because these are merely mid 14-second quarter mile cars. You must reach a plateau of concentration where the machinery gets even swifter. Go all the way back to 1968. This is 1973, mind you. 5 years before that, they are already like, this is the pinnacle that performance is ever going to be in a 5-year period. And sorry, that was my digression. Think of the street Hemis, the L88s, the Boss 429s. When the era of unconcerned euphoria had us locked in, sit back and get yourself comfortable to savor this progression of performance. And they talk a little bit more. Their Firebird Trans Am SD-455 covered the quarter mile. This is Car and Driver 1973 in 13.751 seconds at 103.56 miles per hour. And that was with the automatic gearbox.
That's, I mean, good numbers for the time. And
very good numbers.
And definitely when you were considering, I mean, they saw already what was coming then. I don't think we would see that kind of performance until probably the late 80s.
Yeah, late
Like a
80s, early 90s, I
like
bet.
a 13.7. I mean, I'm thinking the Grand National, the Turbo Trans Am. Ironically,
Okay.
both of those cars, turbo V6s, not V8s.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, the Mustangs, the Camaros, the IROCs, they weren't running that fast. I don't think a Corvette was running that fast. But you could get the Grand National, I think might have been close. The GNX certainly was. And then the fastest American car, at least of the 1980s, quarter mile wise, was the '89 Turbo Trans Am.
Hmm.
So yeah, how about some symmetry there from the '73 Trans Am SD-455 to the '89 Turbo Trans Am uh, with the Turbo V6.
Yeah, that is an interesting symmetry that I've literally never thought about before. That they
And then
kind of
arguably the worst car. I've can you tell I've done a little time with this. Arguably the worst performance car of that era.
okay.
1980 Turbo Trans Am.
That one, I didn't think they were bad. I just thought they were really, really unreliable.
Though that's why they were bad. The 4.9 liter V8 with the turbo was just horrifically unreliable. It was just kind of a disaster.
Right.
I mean, at least the Mustangs of the time. I mean, 1980. That's a Fox body Mustang.
That
They
is.
were reliable, just slow. The Corvettes were. I mean, the Corvettes. Well, they were quicker than the Trans Ams. That Turbo Trans Am was just a completely hot, steaming pile of a mess.
Don't
So
hold back.
Trans Am from one gauntlet to the other, the cool sending off the era to okay, the worst of the era, now the fastest in over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So little digression there. I apologize.
No, I think that's a
But
good
but that's
digression
where
to
this
have.
journey starts, right? That's where the journey starts. The 73 Trans Am SD-455. What else you got for us, Bruce?
So the other one that it comes from a little bit later in the 70s, and again, we're talking about the good performance vehicles of the 70s. We aren't getting to the bad ones quite yet. And this is another 2-year only vehicle. This is the 1978 and 1979 Dodge Lil Red Express. LIL X or exclamation point LIL apostrophe Express.
And you
Um,
say, what? A pickup truck? But here's the thing. As the emissions controls and standards and regulations were crimping down more and more and more, there were some loopholes that didn't
right.
necessarily include pickup trucks in some of these. They were still subject to regulations. Not quite the same as cars. So Dodge
Right.
went, let's make a street truck. And I think a good argument can be made that this was the first street truck.
Absolutely.
Little Red Express, full size truck, but they just had the short little bit on it with the flare sides. They put big old chrome exhaust pipes right up the side like a semi truck. Put it on some rally wheels. Gave it a big 360 V8 that actually had decent horsepower. If I remember, I'm going strictly from memory here.
I got the number.
225 horsepower, I think was its
You
peak.
nailed it. Yep.
Look at
Net
that.
horsepower, 225 horsepower. It essentially was using a police spec motor. So if you've ever watched the Blues Brothers, it's got cop brakes, cop engine. Yeah, it's
Cop
like that.
motor.
Yeah. So it's like you said, it's a 360 cubic inch V8 that they generally sold to the police. And the loophole that they were exploiting at the time is that trucks didn't have to have catalytic converters, whereas cars did. And so by not
So
needing to have catalytic converters, you could obviously open up a bunch of power there. But they
breathing a little
also,
bit better.
yeah, but they also added a modified exhaust, modified intake. Like, they did a few other things as well to get as much power out of this pickup as possible. And the hilarious thing was in 1978, this was the quickest car that car and driver measured to 100 miles per hour.
The quickest new vehicle. Yeah.
Amongst new vehicles. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, 225 horsepower does not sound like much at all. But in 1978 in the United States, that was pretty darn good. It was more than the Mustang. It was more.
It was a lot more than Mustang.
Well, yeah, it was more than Camaro and Trans Am, because I think Trans Am was still somewhere around 210. I think at that point. Mustang wasn't close to that. Corvette, I don't think. I think Corvette was around like 190 or 200, maybe somewhere.
By 78, I'm not sure. We will be talking about the 75 to 77 Camaro and a Corvette later, because they made the bad list, because they're pretty sad in terms of.
But it was a sneaky way to keep some performance going at arguably what's a lot of people think is the darkest era of performance.
Definitely.
So yeah, very glad to have that on the list. Bruce
Mr. Smith, I've got a question for you. Does a muscle car have to be American?
No. I mean, okay. Send the hate mail, rambling about cars podcast at Gmail. Muscle car is traditionally an American term, but in my opinion, no, it does not. Especially when you consider Australia at the time was building muscle cars. And while things were getting weaker here through the 70s, they were just still freaking awesome in Australia.
Yes.
So no, I don't think it has to be an American car. Okay. So lay it on me.
So let's talk about the 1977. Wow, I got to double check this. I believe it's 77 to 81. And of course, again, I'm having issues with these damn tabs.
Tab fatigue.
Yep. So introduced in 1977. I believe it lasted until 1981. Hopefully, by the time I'm done talking about it, I will have that tab open and be able to tell you for sure. But the 1977 Mercedes-Benz 450 SEL 6.9.
Wow, you're pulling out the big Benz, huh?
It's German, but I think it's still a muscle car. I think you can vaguely make that definition of it. And the reason I say that is it's got a big V8 mounted out front. And how big, you ask? Well, that 6.9 badge at the front is actually slightly inaccurate. It's technically 6.8 liters, 417 cubic inch engine. And that was making 250 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. Again, that's in 1977. So that's the Lil Red Express, again, which is hilarious that we were just talking about, made 225. This Mercedes making 250, but the engine is a good bit bigger. It was the M3 or the M5, sorry, of its time, or the E-Class AMG, E63 AMG of its time. It was a serious performance car.
I mean, I can't really argue against that. We've got all the ingredients there. We've got the big engine. We've got some horsepower. I mean, I don't know exactly how much that car weighs, but muscle isn't necessarily just about screaming top speed. Hey, can you roll on the gas and just smoke the tires? I know a lot of people would say, hey, that qualifies. I mean, I'll give it to you. I don't know. That era never really did much for me from Mercedes, to be honest. So
you don't like a boxy Mercedes?
Sorry. Again, everybody,
no.
Send the hate mail, ramblingaboutcarspodcast at gmail.com. That era, it just never really did that much for me, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll give it to you. It qualifies. It's got big numbers. It's got some power. It'll smoke the hides. 70s muscle. We can't. If this is the 70s, folks, we can't be that picky. It's the late 70s to boot. You really can't be that picky. You know what I'm saying?
So here's what I'm thinking. We're at 34 minutes here. In the interest of time, how about I skip the other ones of my best, because I've done 3 good ones now. And why don't I go ahead and do
I know you. Let's just gloss over this, because I know you were talking about some Z cars, some Datsun 260s, 280. I don't know that qualify. I mean, that's performance,
I
but
prep for it, but
not muscle. You'd have to make a really strong argument for me to say, okay, we'll lump those in the muscle category because they had some performance, but not muscle.
Sure, I think that's fair. They had performance, but not muscle. Because I was looking at from 73 to roundabout 83, as we know. And so 74, you get the 260Z, 77, you get the 280Z, and then 79, you get the 280ZX, and then in 80, you get the ZX Turbo. So I agree that they're not quite muscle cars. What I will say, and I think this is interesting, is that despite them having inline six engines, so 2 cylinders less than a lot of the muscle cars we've been talking about, they had very similar outputs in terms of horsepower. I've got
similar outputs, yep.
A 260Z had 151 horsepower, 280Z, and this is just because of emissions and stuff like that, 149. A 280ZX, it gets even worse, I guess. I shouldn't, maybe this doesn't help my point, but only 135. But if you get the turbo, that goes up to 180. So, at least during the 70s, a Z car was very competitive.
Comparable to some, but if we're going to go that route, we got to start talking about things like the Chevy Cosworth Vega. God, that almost slipped my mind for a minute. I love that car, the little Cosworth Vega.
I included that car on this list, but I decided not to.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you could still have fun in the 70s, but yes. muscle, different. I mean, I would almost, and I even thought about this. I would almost even say, get a big old, Cadillac 500 cubic inch V8, something
no.
It doesn't have a lot of horsepower, but it's just ridiculous amounts of torque. If you pull up to a stoplight, but if pull up to stoplight, brake torque it, the whole thing just twists itself from torque. That's muscly, man. You can make an argument there. I bet I can make a stronger argument for that than going with a Z car.
Okay, agree to disagree.
Fair enough. Now, go ahead. I know what's coming. The listeners that we have that were with us before on the former iteration of Rambling About Cars, you probably know what's coming too. So go ahead, Bruce. Hit me with it. I can come back.
The Ford Mustang II is amongst the lowlights of... So, okay, we could start this agreement off, or we could start this discussion off saying whether or not a Mustang is a muscle car, because conceivably they're a pony car. They fit more with the Firebird, the Camaro, the Mustang, obviously, with that class of vehicles versus kind of the true muscle cars. But I still think it's worth bringing up here simply because it was such a gargantuan change versus the original Mustang, the 64.5 to 73 Mustang.
So to be clear, this is on your bad list, right?
This is on my bad list. And
so a Mustang generation that sold 1 million cars is on your bad list.
Yes, because it's all people it was the only option anyone had. It's not like...
What do you mean it's the only option? That was the only car made in the 70s?
No, the Camaro sold quite well as too, but
it didn't sell that well.
It didn't sell that well. No.
So it's on the bad list because Ford sold too many.
No, it's on the bad list because
it's on the bad list because Ford built the car that people wanted to buy for that era. I'm trying to figure this out.
So that is the good counter argument, is that clearly enough people wanted them that it was okay. It was acceptable at the time.
Oh, it was more than acceptable. They sold 1 million. They sold over 1 million in 4 years.
Yeah. But the thing is, that's really before, imports start taking over in the 80s and stuff like that. And there's really legit competition. Like, at the time, the big competition against the Mustang II was the Camaro and the Firebird, and we'll be talking about one of those cars in just a second.
Well, I'm kind of busting you up here a little bit, but
no, you're not. You're not at all. It's fun to have the discussion.
Ford took Mustang in a completely different direction. Yeah. That's what a lot of people tend to forget over time. They took it in a completely different direction. Keep in mind, that was the second generation. We've had 60 years of Mustang now to get used to it being a pony car, a muscle car. And yes, I think it's perfectly legit to call it a muscle car because it was around in that original classic muscle car era. It certainly had gobs of V8 performance. That's muscle car material. So yeah, you can call it a pony car. That's fine. You can call it a muscle car. But in 1974, Ford, looking at the era, looking at what's coming, looking at trends, people they're kind of wanting smaller cars. The original 65 was billed as this small non-performance beast. You could get it with a V8, but it was more about the lifestyle. So that's the way Ford steered the car in 74.
Well, I think something to add to that is that the original Mustang had a lot in common with the Falcon at the time. And
well, it was built on a Falcon,
yeah. Yeah. And then the second gen Mustang had a lot to do with the Pinto at the time.
Yes, it did.
They shared,
there was some commonality between the Mustang and the Pinto. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And then, you know what? We're looking at pictures of the Mustang King Cobra. It's a neat car, but Ford went way too far with that. They saw the attention that the Firebird was getting, right?
Yep.
And the Firebird, hey, you know what? The Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, it went down in power too, but it sure looked badass. There is no question that car looked awesome all throughout that period. Of course, Smoking the Bandit made it famous. Mm-hmm. It had that big honking Firebird on the hood. So here comes Ford with their Mustang II King Cobra with a big Cobra on the hood that conveniently looks like a Firebird.
It does.
And it's all an appearance package. The hood scoops on those King Cobras. If you notice, at the time, Ford also built the Mustang II Cobra. Mm-hmm. And that was a sporty variant. The hood scoop on the Mustang Cobra 2, it was a fake hood scoop. It didn't actually go anywhere. But they took that hood scoop for the King Cobra and just turned it around.
Oh, really?
So when you look at the King Cobra,
oh wow,
it looks like it's a scoop that comes up that looks like it's like pulling air from underneath. It's just this. It's the Cobra 2 hood scoop that's turned 180 degrees. And it's kind of silly. And of course, you've got the big chin spoiler and all that going on. I have to admit that I love it because it's that just kind of grandiose 70s. Look at me. I need all of your attention right now. They didn't change anything under the hood. And my numbers are slipping me here in my older age, but
I'm looking at the numbers right now. So let's see.
I think that peaked at like 120 or 125 horsepower in the King Cobra. It got up to 140. Okay. Yep. 120 must have been like the early Foxes.
Could be. Yeah. But yes, because I have the numbers here. In 74, when the Mustang II debuted, there was no V8 option.
It was the only year for no V8. Yeah.
Yeah. You could get a 4-cylinder with 92 horse or a V6 with 105. And then in 75, the following model year, the V8 arrived and it had 140. Mm-hmm. So
well, but by the time you get to the end of that era, though, in 78 with the King Cobra, I don't think it was still 140.
It might not have been.
I would have to. I'm going to have to look that up here really quick. Just because
for you. It's a frustrating period of automobiles to me. Just because you have these huge engines, especially by modern standards, whether you're talking about Chevy 350s or, kind of sort of even that 455 SD, that you hear these power outputs and you're like, how are they so low? And that's partially me looking at things that, you know, there are no electronics whatsoever. They're carbureted. There's no kind of fuel injection process going on.
Well, keep in mind too, I mean, it wasn't just the fuel injection or the computer control. These engines had to be retuned for emissions purposes. It wasn't just, hey, we put catalytic converters on that's going to plug up the exhaust. Things had to be retuned as well.
Yes.
I mean, you can adjust ignition time. I mean, I'm not a professional mechanic by any means, but I mean, even just something as simple as adjusting the ignition timing on an old school distributor will drastically change power output and thusly emissions. So it wasn't just a case of they couldn't figure out how to make big power out of it. They were handicapped. They had to stick to these certain emissions points, which is why you have big engines with relatively low horsepower ratings, but they generally still had a lot of torque. So when you got into them, it was like, hey, this is a riot from 0 to 30. You know, that initial push of torque, because they're just making all of their power like almost right off idle, but then they just run out of steam really quick. And that's kind of just a characteristic of that era.
The other thing that we all have to keep in mind, because especially since we're not actually driving these cars, is that the Society of Automotive Engineers, the SAE, they changed the way that that horsepower was calculated in the early 1970s. It was I can't remember if it was 73 or 74. So they went from a gross rating, which was the maximum amount of power the engine could produce with no accessories whatsoever on it, to a net figure, which it would have, oil pump, power steering, brakes, whatever all the accessories necessary to run that engine and all of its other pieces had to be on there. And all of those little things, their losses because of that. And so it made it look like the engines weren't nearly as powerful.
Right. And to go back to the Mustang II, it was lower in 78 by 1.
Oh, it made 139 or
139 horsepower is the number that I'm coming up with.
In 78. Okay.
I think it must have been like around 80 or maybe even 81, where Mustang was only like 120 some horse. Just the darkest era, if you will,
for Mustang. But
for Mustang, but we have other cars to talk about here. I've been going on about Mustangs here, but we've got other cars on the bad list, right?
We do. And I specifically picked out the 1975 through 1977 Chevrolet Camaro as one of the absolute lowest points ever in muscle cardom, or at least in American muscle cardom. Let me pull up a photo here and then I'll kind of start giving you the specs, but they are dire. These are cars that were available, with Chevy's famous 350, small block Chevy V8. Let me find my notes.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting. I mean, we associate the Camaro and the Firebird together, and they were really the same car underneath. I mean, there was some minor reskinning, but back then they didn't share powertrains. They didn't share engines. Correct. Pontiac still had its engines, which at the time included the 6.6, which is what made the Trans Am so good. The Camaro was making do with 305s and 350s.
Yep. And in 75, there were two 350 cubic inch V8s available. Just to put that into perspective, that's 5.7 liters. That's, by modern standards, I can't think of much outside of like the truck world. I guess while it's still, you can technically get it, a Hellcat or something like that, but there aren't that many engines that are that big out there these days. But 5.7 liters, you could get it in two tunes, one that made 145 horsepower and one that made 155 horsepower. So pretty sad days.
Yeah, I mean,
I was just going to say 76 things did get a little bit better, and you could get it with up to 165 horsepower. Not that that's a a big gain. And then in 77, it grew again to 170. And that's kind of what we're seeing here is, like you were saying, Smith, automakers have to get used to using these catalytic converters at the time. And so things start out bad, but you see these like incremental improvements year by year, and then eventually you get to 83,
the turbo,
84.
Well, I don't think Chevrolet ever did a turbo Camaro. I think the turbo Trans Am was just for the Trans Am. So yeah.
Yeah.
But again, and feel free to comment, and feel free to send all your hate mail, ramblingabouttcarspodcast@gmail.com. Torque does matter. I know I sound like I'm making excuses, but we're talking about muscle. It's not just about pure horsepower output at a certain RPM. You've got the whole range of the engine. You're still getting a fair amount of torque from these cars. There's for just rolling around on the street, you would be surprised. I don't know, Bruce, if you've ever had a chance to drive some of these older cars. You'd be surprised when you roll on the gas. It's like, oh, you get that hit right away. You get that familiar hit right away. It's just that it dies like in seconds. It's like you just as you're waiting for the car to really start pulling, it just stops. And I mean, and that's really the best way to describe it. It's like you get that initial feeling and it's familiar. It's like, okay, this thing's gonna go, and then it just doesn't. But for a little bit, you have the illusion. I mean, that was my takeaway. I drove a 77 Mustang II with the V8 and completely stock. And I was I got in it expecting, okay, this is going to be a dog. This is just going to be kind of silly. And I stepped on the gas and it was an automatic, and oh, here comes the V8 sound. Okay, that sounds familiar. And for like maybe 2 or 3 seconds, count it out. 1, 2, 3. For those 2 or 3 seconds, I was like, damn, this is not nearly as slow as it's a neat experience. So, I mean, we're kind of dogging here on the Camaro. I would definitely have the Trans Am over the Camaro of that era.
Yes.
But once you get back up into the Z28s, okay, the Z28s were pretty cool. I like what they were doing just package wise with the Z28s. But I don't think we got back to the Z28 until 77 or 78. I have to.
It was 77. I'm just curious why. Because you're really defending these cars. Is it just that?
Because I'm stupid. I said it in the beginning of the podcast.
No. It has nothing to do with that.
I think I know what you're saying here. Why am I defending these cars?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is kind of the worst that American muscle ever got. American performance cars just in general ever got. So it's always interesting to kind of find out what are the good points about them, because we talk about this all the time. Anyone can be a car enthusiast, and that includes anyone. If you want to own a 75 Camaro with 145 horsepower, that's I applaud that. But
right there's mistake number one. You want to own a 75 Camaro with 145 horsepower. Nobody cares about the horsepower. We know the horsepower was bad through this era. I guess that's why I come in with the argument. It's very easy to look at this era through 40, 50 years of history that's taken place between now and then.
Yeah, 50.
It's harder. It's harder to consider that era in the context of that era. Yes. Now, I don't remember the 70s. I was born in the 70s. I do not remember the 70s. I remember the 80s awesomely. I do not remember the 70s one teeny bit, except that my dad had a 79 Ford F-150 that he bought new, and put stacks at the side like the Lil Red Express, which when you're like 3 or 4 years old is really cool.
That's pretty cool.
I do remember that. But the context of the era is, okay, things are changing, and frankly, they needed to change. We needed to take a closer look. We needed to take a sharper eye to emissions, to economy. And I also defend this era because the changes that happened here, the things that automakers were forced to do, gave us the crazy stuff that we have today.
Yes.
And if they weren't forced to think outside the box, if they weren't forced to find new ways to create performance, you wouldn't have an 807 horsepower supercharged Hellcat V8 that meets modern emissions, not necessarily current right now emissions, modern emissions. I mean, think about how much more efficient that engine is now with 807 horsepower versus a 426 Hemi in 1969.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who do you have to thank for the 70s, the Malaise era?
Yeah.
So that's why I defend.
No. And I think that's a very good thing to defend. And you and I have had the discussion before that you think the 1980s are the most technologically important era of automobiles, like basically after World War II. You know?
Yeah, that era, I would say starting in 73 with the Malaise era, as changes were, as it was recognized changes were needed. The changes were made, and then they were improved, and then they were really improved, and it set everything up for the 21st century. It set up everything for what we have now. And I look at the timeline of the automobile basically in two segments: before 1980 and after. Before 1980, think about the technology in an automobile. Few advancements were made over that time, but 1980 to 1910.
2010.
No, 1980 to 1910.
Oh, okay.
The bones are kind of the same. I mean, you could say the bones are still the same today. But when you look at the fundamentals of an engine, the fundamentals of suspension, just the fundamentals of all of that working together mechanically, there's not that much difference. From 1980 to 2024.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Is that previous
how much of a difference is there?
Things are very mechanical. You still have carburetors. Even like mechanical fuel injection is kind of a glorified carburetor if you kind of look at it. But then you end up getting into electronically controlled fuel injection and
direct injection
and just all of the stuff that we have today, you know.
So that's how I see it.
Turbochargers becoming, like, you know, massively more efficient over the last 20
before 1980
years.
After 1980.
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy. I think there's an argument there. I think it's something we should like kind of give a whole episode to, maybe.
I was about to say that this would be a great episode.
Yeah, I think, you know, because since we're going monthly, it would give us a lot more time to research, ideally. And I think that's something that you and I could kind of have a back and forth about, because there's bits of it I disagree with, but I think in general, I'm on your side.
Okay. Well, I mean, feel free to disagree. That makes things more exciting.
Yeah.
But that'll be for a future episode. You still have one more car to beat me up with on the bad list before we get to our cheap car challenge.
I do. And that is, again, 1975 to 1977. Not Camaro this time, but Chevrolet Corvette. Because the Corvette has been America's performance car. We can debate whether or not it's a muscle car. I think at sometimes in its history it has been. At sometimes it hasn't been. Some trims are muscle cars to me. Some aren't. But regardless of that, 75 to 77 is the absolute worst things ever got. 75, it was available with two engines. You could get a 350 small block Chevy, making 165 horsepower. You could also get an L82 small block, making 205 horsepower. That's as low as things ever got. Things did improve again, like we were talking about with the Camaro right after that. 76 and 77, those numbers eventually improved to 180 and 210 horsepower, respectively. So, it's just you're kind of bending me towards your will here a little bit, that not bad cars, just they're a stepping stone along the way of where
It
we
was a
are
stepping
today.
stone for the change. And of course, I said at the beginning of this podcast, C3 era, my favorite Corvette. Of course, that runs from 68 to 82. So,
Great.
all things being equal, I would love a 19. Well, I would love a 68 to probably 72 or 73 Corvette.
Mm-hmm.
I would love that style. 74 up through like 78, 79. Yeah, I would shy away from those, but not because of power or styling, just because I prefer the beginning of that era or the very end of that era.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the styling is largely the same. There were some
there were some pretty big changes by the end.
Yeah. I mean, there were some tweaks and some facelifts by the end of that era. Again, is it the best era in terms of performance? Of course not. Nobody expects it to be. But in the context, they were doing what they were doing. They were doing what the new regulations needed them to do. Mm-hmm. And automakers were also responding to people. Again, I'll use the Mustang II as an example. You don't sell over 1 million cars in 4 years if people don't want to buy them. So it wasn't just a case of, oh gosh, we've got to make this 140 horsepower Mustang because Uncle Sam is telling us to. Over 1 million. They sold over 1 million. That was the right car. It was the right car for the time, man. And I wish people could look at it more in that context.
But it's hard though, because you think of the one before that had so much better performance, and then you think of the Fox body that, okay, at the begin it took a little while, but by the late 80s,
nobody trashes on that very, very early Fox, and that's I would much rather have any Mustang II than a 79 to 82 Mustang.
Well, Smith,
with one exception. I would be very happy with, I think it's the 79 pace car, the official pace car, just because, hey, it's neat. It's a part of history. It's pretty cool. But otherwise, those early Foxes, just terrible. 83, 84, 85, 86 with the nice 4i and now we're starting to get better. Now we're starting to get some power.
Well, again, a fantastic transition into our cheap car challenge this week, because I found several cars. One of them is a Mustang. I wasn't sure if that was going to be the one I was going to pick for tonight, but now that we've had this discussion, I have to.
Well, I think you have to lead us off and go first here then.
Okie doke. So the cheap car challenge was $10,000, a car from 1973, or a performance car, a muscle car from 1973 to 1983, and that was the rules. Always, like, roughly in your area, roughly. We can stretch that as much as we need to.
And I also made a note that it should be at least fairly decent. No, like, hey, look at this 1968 or look at this 1970 Corvette ZR1 that I found, or Corvette LT. I can't remember what it was.
73 to 83.
So. Oh, okay, that's it. Well, look at this 77 Pontiac Trans Am Special Edition in perfect condition that doesn't have an engine or transmission or a hood or a trunk or a T-top that I can buy for $9,000. No, $10,000, and it has to be in at least fairly decent shape. It can't just be like a bomber.
Well, speaking of the early Fox body Mustangs, I found a 1983 Ford Mustang convertible for $6,700 in Holland, Indiana. It's a 1983. It is not a V8. It has the 3.8 liter. That's the Cologne V6.
That's
right?
The Cologne V6. Yep.
Automatic.
You can buy that for like $4,000 all day long, man. Nobody wants those cars.
Wheel and deal?
Hell yeah. An 83 V6. Hey, you know what? I know it's old, but nobody
Look,
really
the
wants
interior's
those
in
cars.
great shape, though. Look at this.
Okay, 4,500. Is that
interior?
It looks like that's been redone inside.
It might have been. But anyway, let me continue reading. I put $2,500 into getting the engine rebuilt, which I have a receipt for. Complete conversion to R134 1A AC. New automatic top motor and tires. New starter, spark plug wires, fuel filter, cap and rotor, battery, and thermostat within the last year. I have receipts for these. As a front and rear dash cam that displays on part of the rear mirror. I do not believe that one bit. As a Pioneer radio and aftermarket speakers, it would make someone a great cruising car. I just got too deep into it. Comes with original manuals. $6,700.
I got too deep into it. You got too deep into an 83 Mustang V6. I mean, for that price, he could have LS swapped it, and then you'd have had some bones, some muscle to go with it. And I mean, I'm supposed to be the Mustang guy here, and
you're getting overly judgy about my first pick.
Well, I mean, technically, it falls into that era, but there's nothing muscle about that muscle car, man.
Okay. Well, I've got
other than it's got a Ford badge. You want to see what I got?
I do.
Okay. Let me start.
So let me get. So before you put it up here,
one of these you might guess. The other, you'll have no idea. I promise.
I'm guessing you found a Firebird or Camaro, one or the other.
For my first one, neither.
Okay.
I have a 1982 Corvette Stingray, $8,500. Got the T-tops, got the louvers on the back window, 97,000 miles, automatic transmission, strong running car, completely original, just needs a little TLC. I don't know what the TLC is. There's only one photo. It could mean that there's no interior in there, but at $8,500 for an 82 Corvette, I got to think it needs some TLC, but not that much. I can see if you look on the front nose there, if you look on the clip, it's a little discolored there on the front, so it probably needs some paint work. But I mean, it's got the right wheels. I'm not really enthused with silver, or I guess gray here, silvery gray. But man, it's the last year for the C3. The window louvers, I love the louvers. This is going to have the 350 that's, I think, 210 horsepower. So not gobs of power, but gobs enough to be fun. It'll have that nice and muscly V8 sound. I can take the T-tops out and crank up some disco and boom.
Some ABBA.
Well, 82, I guess. I mean, ABBA's a little bit earlier than that, but you can still get away with it there in 82.
I think you could still get away with it.
I'd be all right with that. So that's probably my first choice.
Okay. So I also found a Corvette. It is not in as good of condition as yours. I also found a Corvette that looks immaculate, but the price makes me think it's a scam. So I'm not going to show that one. But I found a C3 Corvette for $6,700 that looks way too good to be true, but $6,700 is a weird price to ask for. So I don't know. I'm not going to show that one. But how about a 77 Corvette for 10 grand? Yes, I see the paint flaking off the front. We said it's not a basket case, though. It does run and drive.
No. Yeah. No, that fits the bill halfway decent.
So yeah, 77 Corvette, automatic with a 350.
The luggage rack on the trunk, on the back there.
But we said our price range was 10 grand. It's exactly 10 grand. It fits the bill. You know, it shows that
it's a little red Corvette, man.
Yeah, it's a little red Corvette. These cars are out there.
And you know what? You punch the gas, the rear wheels would probably spin.
Yeah.
They would probably spin if you floor it from a stop. on maybe a paved surface with a little bit of dirt or dust on it, possibly wet.
Yeah.
No, it would light up the tires pretty good.
It'd be fine. You know,
It would sound good. And
the, the body's fiberglass, so
yep.
those chips don't bother me quite nearly as much as if it were an actual metal body. So
yeah. I mean, you just have to look underneath to see what's going on underneath there. But
yeah,
I mean, I think we're kind of showing people you can have some kind of neat old classic cars that stand out in a crowd. And yeah, you know what? You're driving around in a C3 Corvette in 2024. I mean, people will notice whether you're into that sort of thing or not. I don't know, but you can dive into this and not spend a lot of money.
I've got a cheater entry, so why don't you show your second one, and then I will show my cheat.
Okay,
entry.
well, I'll show my cheat entry.
Oh, okay.
And then you show your cheat entry. Well, I'll show my cheat entry and then the legit one.
No, go ahead and show do the legit one first.
They're kind of similar. Here's the cheat one. This is a 1973 Chevrolet Malibu SS. These cars in 73, this was 245 horsepower. So they still had some muscle. SS, yeah. It's sort of the end of the larger muscle car era.
Yeah.
It's a big two-door, big V8. Now, the price for this one is $999,999. Yeah. We know it's not $999,999. But the ad says it's all original, the original 350. Take a trip back to the Woodstock era. It looks gorgeous inside and out. It says there's slight rust on the passenger side fender. And it just says, hey, make me an offer. So I'll offer 10 grand. Sure. And that's my car. It won't sell for that. I've been looking around on prices, and these in good shape. I mean,
that's not a $10,000 car.
No, they can be like 20 or 30. They've gone up a little bit. This era, that like the 73 Chevelle Malibu SS, it's not there with like the Pontiac SD-455.
Right.
But there's a similar vein where that year is really coveted. After that, these the Chevelles, they kind of dropped off. But that year, the SS, I mean, it has just the cool kind of Chevelle quad taillights going on there. That's a fairly basic interior, bench seat, automatic. I mean, just a neat, big American two-door coupe with a muscly V8 up front. This thing looks in great shape.
It does.
I love the look of that front, just the two big round headlights on the sides, SS badge in the middle. That's my cheater entry because, yeah, hey, I'll offer 10 grand, but he won't sell it for 10 grand, which is why I'll buy this 73 Chevelle Malibu SS for 10 grand. Okay, this one is done 60,000 miles, automatic transmission. It is not original. Just testing the waters. I have a 73 Chevelle Malibu SS. It is a true SS. This one has a small block 383 stroker V8 put in with a built trans. I have the original swivel seats, SS door panels, runs, drives, and stops. Doesn't say it does it well, but it runs, drives, and stops, clean title in hand, asking 10 grand. I got to think at 10 grand that it does run and drive at least.
Are those seats out of a Challenger or something?
They look sort of like Challenger seats, don't they? Let me jump back there. I mean, yeah, it's had some work done to it, but it's a 73 Chevelle Malibu
good work.
SS. In the spirit of this challenge, in stock form, it would still, I think, qualify as Malaise Era muscle.
Totally. No, it fits. If that fits, then my cheat entry fits as well, because
and I always loved that style, that 73. I'm just realizing, looking under the engine bay, I can see the ground on the other side of these fenders.
That was normal, I think. I think it was supposed to be like that.
That much space in there, really? Interesting.
I think so.
Anyways, that's my second pick, going with the old Malibu.
Okay. So we agree. We're agreeing with Merle Martin, who coined the term, that the Malaise era lasts from 1973 to 1983.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if there's a performance car from 1973 to 1983, I think that should roughly count as being Malaise era muscle. I found a 1981 Alfa Romeo Spider for
Wow.
$9,500 with a butterscotch body and a tan roof. And I'm in love with this car. Apparently, it only has 65,000 miles on it and a manual transmission. And it looks to be in immaculate shape. And is it muscle? No. Do I want it right now badly? Yes.
I mean, I guess in the nature of this challenge, that's the equivalent of like the guy that's 6'9" and 120 pounds. It's like, okay, could probably dunk a basketball, but if you get caught in a breeze, he's gone, man.
I agree, but still.
Zero. It's a cool performance car. Zero muscle. Zero muscle.
But man, for less than our budget, gorgeous color combination.
And it runs and drives?
Yeah, new top, battery, tires, stereo, recent oil change, mechanicals by Specialty Auto, which is a well-known, Euro car place here in the area. Few dings on the body, all records available since purchase 2 years ago.
But it doesn't say runs and drives.
He does not technically say it runs and drives now.
Bruce, this is a 45-year-old Alfa Romeo.
Yeah.
Unless it specifically says runs and drives, it does not run and drive. I'm sorry to break this news to you.
Yeah, but it's so pretty.
It is a nice car. I'll give you that.
Okay,
you're stressing the rules. I'll give you that.
Yeah. Well, folks, that's going to be our episode for tonight. We will be back with you next month. And here's what my promise to you. There will be at least one social media post going up every week No, don't laugh at me, Smith.
No. There
you and I are both busy people. We're trying here, man.
There will be posts. Follow us on the socials. We'll keep you in the loop on stuff that's going on. Exactly. It might not even necessarily be related specifically to rambling about cars. No, Bruce might have something that, hey, maybe we can talk about this on the next podcast. What do you think? I might have something. Hey, maybe we can talk about this on the next podcast. What do you think?
Yeah.
Join us there on the discussion.
Yeah.
It can be fun, right?
No, absolutely. It can be fun. It's weird to me because I'm from that like weird, that generation they taught media literacy to, like never share too much of your information on the internet. So like, if you look at any of my socials, it's like the bare minimum of like, I can't let anybody know about these things. And it's so hard now managing the Rambling About Cars account because I have to be like, I have to be like chipper, like putting things in and not just be like, oh, that's cool. I can't let anyone know that's cool. What if someone else knew that was cool? Like, yeah.
Nobody thinks, well, I guess a few people might think that an 81 Alfa Romeo is cool.
I know people that would.
Not like a 78 Mustang Cobra cool, but
yeah, okay. But anyway,
I told you at the beginning, I'm stupid.
So happy Friday, everyone. That's when this episode will be going up. And yeah, we'll be in touch. So thank you so much. We'll see you next month. Like, follow, subscribe, comment, do whatever.
All of that good stuff. Help us grow. We can keep doing this for you.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye.